podcast app, you'll see there's a discourse happening. Is this book a masterpiece or problematic? One's a lifelong diehard fan, the other's a first-time reader. Both are really smart and funny and attractive. Sweet Valley, Sweet Valley, talking trends and hierarchy. Sweet Valley, Sweet Valley, relentless focus on their bodies. Sweet Valley, Sweet Valley, what do they mean by all American? Sweet Valley, Sweet Valley, no sex, just titillation.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Hi there, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Hold on, I need to turn down my heat, and I do that vis-a-vis my phone. Hold on one second.
Does vis-a-vis have any meaning?
Don't be rude.
I was actually asking I was trying to get your expertise vis-a-vis the phrase vis-a-vis. But like, seriously, what does vis-a-vis mean?
What does vis-a-vis mean? It means like, all right, well, okay, let me think about it now. Like, I want to think about it because I want to be precise, and you know I'm a slow thinker. I like to think slow, so just give me a minute if you're going to do that to me. Oh no, I'm about to really go on a ramble.
We could maybe just table this.
Because you asked me, now I have to say it, which is, I think vis-a-vis, it's sort of like this blanket proposition in a way, because it's like, it's the proposition of all propositions, which is to say, it describes the very nature of interaction and intersubjectivity itself. It cannot be. It's saying like, it's saying something happens sort of through something else or by way of. I guess I would say by way of.
Like
It means
via.
by way of. By way of. You asked
Like
me a question.
via.
No, don't say via. I'm telling you by way of. You asked me. Via? No, I'm not talking about trains. Save it for the rail. That's fine.
Save it for the rail is not a phrase.
No, because via rail. Got it?
No, I mean, I get the joke.
No, I'm saying I didn't say it was a phrase. I'm literally saying just keep it for the rails. All right. Sweet Valley High number 20 is Crash Landing. What is your 6-word review, Robert?
Okay, 6 words about Crash Landing. Psychological trauma in various forms. Woof.
That's great. That's excellent.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
I'm ready for your 6. Lay them on me.
Sully Sullenberger ripped off this book.
Yes. Yes. Oh my gosh. Sometimes you out Robert. That is exquisite. What you have done vis-a-vis the 6-word summary.
Am I wrong?
Oh no, you are not wrong.
I mean, for the listeners, what we're talking about is the emergency plane landing on the lake, sinking. Well, these guys are done for. And guess what? They make it because the pilot is so freaking skilled that he, because of course it's a man,
Sorry.
kind of manages to do it, and everyone comes out basically alive. So, I texted you and I said at some point, like, I don't know if you know this, but there's actually something you already know about this book. Did you figure out what I meant?
Absolutely not. Unless is it that Collins and Dalton are banging?
No, but that's huge.
Yeah, it's huge.
The plot of this book is referenced in our show description.
This is embarrassing. Our show description. Where would one find our show description?
I'll just tell you. It doesn't matter. Hysterical paralysis. We talked about hysterical paralysis. That's this.
So, wait, I have to say,
Yep.
The whole time I've been reading it, I've been thinking hysterical paralysis and simultaneously been thinking, Robert, do you know what hysterical paralysis is? Where are these? Like, I was like, I've never heard that phrase before. Like, you inceptioned me.
So what you're saying is you knew that you knew the phrase, but you couldn't remember from where?
Yes.
That's so wild. Because what I was thinking okay, so just to give the transparency, what happens in this, you know what, let's just do the plot summary so that we can just explain this, okay?
Yeah, we can do the cliffhangers very, very quick. Liz
Okay.
and Jess are at the police station. While they're there, they overhear coming through the station. Small aircraft in trouble, vicinity of Seca Lake. I repeat, small plane in trouble. Craft number BA329, rented to one George Warren. Elizabeth let out a horrified gasp. George and Enid, the ordeal was not over yet. Can George and Enid avert disaster? Find out in Sweet Valley High number 20, Crash Landing. That was a cliffhanger. Plot summary?
You start it.
George has been cheating on Enid and wants to leave her for Robin Wilson and plans to tell her right after George and Enid have a delightful romp through the skies aboard a Cessna 150.
Of course, our twins, Jessica and Elizabeth. Enid is the best friend of Elizabeth, and her boyfriend is George. And so, you know, by all accounts, this storyline of George's affair, which has been torturing him emotionally and he's guilt-ridden, and so is Robin, is about to resolve pretty neatly, because this is just the last thing he needs to do is just take Enid on this flight, and then he's going to tell her, and then that's going to wrap that up. So they just got to kind of basically land the plane, and then that's going to pretty much be the end of that story. Nope. What happens is engine starts going, something no good here, and he freaking has to Sully Sullenberger the plane on Seca Lake with everyone watching. George emerges fine, partly thanks to Enid saving his life. Enid, in the course of saving his life, has a spinal injury that leaves her paralyzed.
Luckily enough, the doctor says there is a surgery that they can do for Enid that will restore feeling and nerve sensation to her legs, so she will not be paralyzed for life. And they do the surgery successfully. And yet Enid does not improve at all. She's not improving with physical therapy, and she's not even taking the physical therapy very seriously.
Yeah, and it's like this question of, according to the doctor, there's no apparent like physiological reason why that should be the case. So it's a bit of a question mark. Elizabeth is like, what is going on with Enid? And then basically sort of concocts a plot incorporating Teddy, the son of Collins, to frighten Enid out of her condition and out of her paralysis, which basically restores her physical health, and basically everything is up fine in that regard.
And she realizes that it's not fair for her to manipulate George into staying with her. And so she breaks up with George and says, George, you should be with Robin because you really love Robin. And there is a subplot about Jessica discovering her love of fine French cooking. And she is like doing a great job and seems headed to Paris to cook with the very best of them. And her parents are complete effing assholes to her throughout the entire book.
Yeah. I'm going to just mute for a second and have a graham cracker. Do you want to guess the taglines?
I'm just like on my own while you eat a graham cracker? Do you know kind of the original invention of graham crackers? They were invented by a Christian theologian, and they were supposed to suppress masturbatory urges. Are they working?
I thought that was cornflakes.
Oh, maybe. I love cornflakes, but not as much as I love masturbating. I didn't get a laugh.
Okay, guess the tagline.
Well, so my initial thought would be like, are George and Enid going to survive? But I think what we find out that they survive so quickly that it's like, can George and Enid's relationship survive the crash?
No. Good guess, though.
Thank you. What about something stupid like, will George's deceit of Enid catch up with him in the end?
Am
I going to get them?
I just think you need to think outside the bun a little bit here. I mean, remember, we usually have the one on the front that's the type of thing you're phrasing of like, will thing be thing?
Yeah.
And then there's the one on the back, which is like random thing, ... So you can also take a stab at that one.
Oh, what about just like, will Enid walk again? No?
No, this one's weird because it's like everything's ambiguous because it's like,
what's going to happen? ...
Which fork is this? No, okay. On the front,
Mhm.
And I sympathize with you. I would have never guessed this. So I'm not trying to say I'm holier than thou in terms of the taglines, okay?
You are holier.
On the front is, will Elizabeth lose her best friend?
Oh, I should have known. As I was doing it, I was like, oh, I bet it's related to Elizabeth more than Enid. Yeah, that's good.
Kind of like Dear Sister vibes,
Yeah,
right? It's definitely, there's a lot of Dear Sister things in here.
I agree.
And on the back,
A plane crash, ...
like, basically, yeah, it's a very, like, sensationalistic. It's very, like, oh, okay. National Enquirer, like.
George's illicit affair, ...
No, it's Terror in the Skies.
Oh, that's good. ...
Isn't that
Terror
good?
in the Skies, ... is really good.
And then the cover, I mean, I don't know if you want to guess what we see on the cover, but do you want to take a guess?
So it's hard because the cover, if the tagline is "Will Elizabeth lose her best friend?" the cover can't be Enid in a wheelchair. It has to be Enid. I mean, what I want, and I know it isn't this, is I want the plane going down with smoke. But I bet it's not that. Because it's always just two people on the front. So it's just got to be two people. So it's definitely Enid and Elizabeth on the front.
Mm-hmm.
Does she have blood all over her? That'd be cool.
Okay, I'm going to show you.
Oh! Huh.
Feelings, describe.
So we have Elizabeth cradling Enid. Enid is wearing like a turquoise blouse with white piping. And Elizabeth's wearing like a purple and black striped blouse with the sleeves pushed up. And Elizabeth is cradling Enid to her bosom. Enid is out, Enid's eyes are closed. And she doesn't look worse for wear. She just looks kind of asleep. There's no blood. There's no indication there's really been any damage. She doesn't have like soot or I mean, theoretically, this is right after the landing. So she should be soaking wet, but she's not.
This cover is crazy, okay? This cover is wild. I mean, it needs to be said. I mean, it's so like dramatic, I feel, compared to most of them. Like, in this one, we're seeing the like quote unquote like emergency moment or crisis moment. Whereas like even like Dangerous Love, we saw them on the bike during the moment of the thrill before the accident happens, you know? Like, I agree with your sense that it gives the atmosphere of potentially being like right afterwards. And I think like what's interesting about this one is the background is this like black, I don't know if you can see sort of gradient.
Yeah. Smoky? Is it mountains?
I mean, of course, narratively speaking, this is impossible because if it's the moment of the crash or after the crash or at the lake, Elizabeth, of course, was not there. She was famously at the police station with the Wakefields. But I think it's supposed to evoke like smoke or metaphorical smoke, and maybe also the fog of Enid's psychology afterwards. And like, I think like also some of the ambiguity of like, is she sleeping? Is she unconscious? Is she dead? It's also the like, she ends up being, she's not in a coma, but like she's awake, but she's in a kind of, there's a psychological block. There's some sort of mental fog happening or something like this, maybe. Another like, I mean, a huge reaction I had to this one was just Enid's look, her hair and her, like, I thought your reaction would be so different. I thought you'd like go nuts at this one because Enid's style is so
bad.
Bold. Good, I think. For me, it's like really good 80s. Like she has that hairdo that is actually now stylish, which is the like curly bangs thing.
Right.
She seems like stylish on here. I'm just like, okay.
I mean, she's a member of PBA. So
barely by the skin of her teeth.
Yeah, you're telling me.
I'd like to talk about what you expected versus what you got, maybe.
Yeah, so I thought it was going to be much more of a heartwarming tale. I thought overall it was going to be like the big drama was going to be the crash landing. And then once they come through that together, they're tighter than ever. And we just get rid of Robin Wilson and we don't have to worry about her kind of mucking up our love affair anymore. And that absolutely is not what happened at all. And I guess as I think through it more, like that does make sense because that would be a one chapter book. So I liked what I got much more than what I was expecting.
Yeah. This one I think is interesting because like some of the themes that we've talked about before come up at like sometimes a little bit different ways. Like the whole thing of like when like something really bad happens to your loved one or like the person you're in a relationship with, and like you may or may not have played some role in that.
Yeah.
Like, what do you owe them? And like, what types of self-sacrifice are demanded by love? There's a lot of like Elizabeth in this book sort of evaluating like, is George worthy of her sympathy? Like, is George and Robin, who are the cheaters, worthy of her sympathy or compassion or kindness or not? And like, she feels so conflicted because she's loyal to Enid. But like over time, over the course of the book, she sees them behave in ways that like demonstrates to her that they are either remorseful or committed to doing the right thing. And both
Right.
George and Robin are trying to sort of do right. Like George and Robin are both trying to sort of like be as good as they can be within this, like be as like they're shown as like they really resisted the affair, but eventually they realized they couldn't deny it was between them and they feel so guilty and they're going to break up with their partners right away. And Robin even actually already broke up with her boyfriend that morning. This whole question of like, was George responsible in terms of the flying for the accident or not? I think it's very much in dialogue with the like dear sisters, the heartbreakers, promises, what we just went through with Stephen and Betsy, like this whole thing of like of just how do you do right by a loved one who's suffering, and like how much do you have to suffer, and like at what point can you prioritize honestly your own happiness? And just because like part of this book is this myth that like the right thing to do for George is to pretend he still loves Enid so that he can like quote unquote support her through her recovery. What ends up happening is he tries to do that, but because he's so emotionally A, stressed out, and B, elsewhere, and C, like he ends up not being able to be that supportive to her.
So we open chapter 1 with Enid and George up in the Cessna 150. Enid is having an amazing time. It's so beautiful. She's loving it. George is having a markedly less good time. He's uneasy because of Enid. He's thinking resolutely, today's the day. No matter how awful it is to do it, I've got to tell Enid about Robin and me. And Enid is just going on and on about how great this is and how lucky she is and how grateful she is that George brought her up as the first person ever to be in the plane with him. And George kind of pensively sighs, a promise is a promise. And then we just get a little tiny bit of backstory about how George met up with Robin at the flying lessons. George had never met anyone like Robin before. They had so much in common. He could tell her everything. Her passion for planes and flying was as great as his. She was the first girl who'd ever understood his dream of becoming a pilot. And this to me was very funny for a couple of reasons. One is they have so much in common. It is just this one thing. It is literally just the pilot thing. It also, I don't know if our listeners are Bachelorette fans, but Rachel Recchia, a recent Bachelorette who is currently on Bachelor in Paradise, is a, brace yourself, Pardo, woman who is also a pilot. And there was this guy on her season who made it really far, based almost exclusively on the strength that he was also interested in planes.
That's funny.
So this was just giving me that kind of moment. I guess pilots are so single-minded that like being a pilot is such a big part of their personality that they like are just drawn to anyone else who understands the piloting lifestyle. I am someone who drives, I don't fly, but wouldn't it be very weird if I were like, Pardo, I met the perfect guy. He knows everything about me. We have everything in common. He totally understands that we both drive cars. It's like so funny to me.
Not to be a George apologist here, but I think you're being so reductive. Like
I am.
I mean, George does not use planes for transit from here to there. This is his passion. This is his hobby that he really gets a lot of fulfillment out of. So I could see that you could develop a bond with someone over that.
Yeah.
I mean,
I totally see what you mean. I just think the way it's presented is funny because these books like treat attraction and relationships as if you only need one thing. So for them, it is just the pilot thing and that's it. And we're good to go. But presumably everyone in George's flight class also understood George's dream of being a pilot. So if there was any other woman there as well, wouldn't he share the same bond with her?
Yeah, but how many people are in a flight class that are age?
That's a question I don't know. That's a great point.
I don't know. Okay, and then important paragraph.
Yeah.
At first, George had refused to admit that the feelings he had for Robin were growing beyond casual friendship. When he did realize what was happening, he tried his hardest to stop it. He left class early so he wouldn't be able to talk to her. He avoided her smile and made excuses, But then they were paired on their first flying assignment, so they couldn't help it. George knew it was all over. He had fallen in love. There was nothing he could do about it. George and Robin talked it over. It was also hard for her because she's loyal to her boyfriend, Alan.
Who we don't care about. Sorry.
Who we do not care about. But they realize they're in love. And earlier, when they were at the awards ceremony marking the end of the flight class, Robin told George that she told Alan. And it's unclear at this point, but what gets later explained is that what she told Alan was that she was leaving him, and he either suspects it's for another guy or she told him it's for another guy, I think, but she didn't say for whom. Exactly. And so the secret in that sense theoretically has been preserved. This is just one of the many points in the book of it's demonstrating their consistent and continuing efforts to deny the unstoppable nature apparently of this affair. You know what I mean? They're the best possible cheaters. It's telling us.
So George is now thinking, I need to tell Enid. Hey, he thought suddenly, his heart skipping a beat as the yoke stopped vibrating in his hand. Something's wrong. The engine cuts out, so he speaks to air traffic control, who tells him to get the nose up, face into the wind, and take her down into the lake. So they prepare for a crash landing. George says to Enid, the wind is going to help break our fall. We're going to attempt a crash landing into the lake. But remember, the blue water of Second Lake seemed to be rising closer and closer to meet them. Remember what? Enid screamed, closing her eyes. Open the door before we hit the water. Otherwise, it might jam shut, okay? And I thought this was an interesting moment because I was full on expecting him to be like, remember, I always loved you, or remember the time we spent together is beautiful. And it's no, this is an incredibly practical thing about how to get out of a crashed airplane. Remember to open your door.
Oh my God. I'm so sorry if I've mentioned this before, but that really, really reminds me of something, which is in the series finale of Seinfeld, the 2-part, where they plane crash into some random small town and then end up on trial for not being
the good Samaritan law, yawn of the century. Continue.
Unpopular opinion, I loved that finale. I thought it was perfect. So when they're in the plane and it starts to be, and they're oh, we're going down, we're gonna die. Elaine's Jerry, I have to tell you something. He's what? And she's I have always loved you. And then suddenly the plane stabilizes and he's what? And she's oh, I've always loved you, United Airlines.
That is funny.
And it's so this. I'm yeah, you think he's gonna say remember, we gave it a good run.
Jerry, I've always. Hey, what's going on?
We're straightening out.
Hey, Elaine, what was it you were about to say to me on the plane when it was going down?
I've always loved you, United Airlines.
So they crash land in the middle of the lake. Enid is alive. Her neck hurts, but otherwise she's fine. But she looks over at George and he is covered in blood. Interestingly, Enid is smart enough and has the wherewithal to look at George, put her hand over his mouth and nose, and feel whether he's breathing or not. He is breathing, and so she gets herself out of her own seat and then tries to get him out of the seat. And in getting him out of the seat, George falls free of his harness and knocks Enid backwards. The small of her back hit the metal strut hard, and Enid sucked in her breath as a dreadful pain shot up her spine. The next thing she knew, she had slid off the wet wing into the water. It was as if her entire lower body had turned to lead, and she tried to balance herself on the wing so she wouldn't go under. Something's wrong with me, she thought desperately as the wing sank beneath her.
I don't know if you mentioned that when they land and Enid opens her eyes or whatever, it's they're upside down.
Oh, I didn't mention that.
It's pretty crazy. So they land and Enid's screaming so loud that her throat ached. The plane bounced once and then flipped over. the plane was floating upside down in the middle of the lake, buoyed by the light wing, so that the cockpit sat above the water like a small dome. She couldn't bring herself to open her eyes. And then she heard water lapping against the cockpit. And when she turned around, they're strapped in their seats, hanging upside down like an amusement park ride. And her head is just several inches above the water. And the only thing keeping her from dropping down is a safety harness. And George...
He's in his seat. He's all bloody.
Yeah. So she has to get him out of his harness and all that. She gives a very impressive performance. Like, she's very, like, it's like she took her junior lifeguard skills, and even in the midst of this, Enid's very impressive in this one.
Yeah, I was very, very impressed.
She's panting with exertion. I'm like, go Enid.
Yeah, get a
Her
girl.
white socks are giving a challenge, and she still makes it work. Like,
oh, this made me think of the first episode of what? Survivor? Yes.
Yeah. Oh, God.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
This made me think of the first episode of this season of Survivor where, like, is it Brandon is like trying to get up the ladder, but he can't get up the ladder because he's got all of his clothes on. So he has like pants and a t-shirt and a sweater on. That's all.
Yeah, I literally was thinking the same thing.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it was hard to watch. So basically what happens is Enid saves George, and then in the course of that injures her spine, can't use her legs, whatever. And then George is kind of holding her up and then sort of keeps her afloat until the rescue comes. And that's how they survive. And she realizes that she can't feel her legs. Can I say something about the crash?
Of course.
The particular sort of thing that happens before they crash, or like the way in which it gets precipitated, I think is interesting. So they're on the plane. George is thinking about how he's stressed out about Robin, right?
Mm-hmm.
They talk about how the Sweet Valley kids are underneath and they can see them. He starts being more vehement and pulling something more vehemently than normal. She's like, what are you doing? And he's bringing the nose of the plane up. I'm going to take us higher, he called, raising his voice over the roar of the engine. As the tiny plane began to climb, George looked more relaxed. He forgot all his cares when he was flying. It was so peaceful up there, he told himself, and the plane was so easy to maneuver. All he had to do was touch the yoke, and it responded perfectly, he thought. Up there. Hey, he thought suddenly, his heart skipping a beat as the yoke stopped vibrating in his hands. Something's wrong. And then he realizes the engine's cut out. There's a metaphor here where, like, the thing that potentially caused the plane to go down is he was trying to go higher. He got greedy.
Oh.
It's like they were having a perfectly nice flight, and he had this sort of moment of agitation, and then he's like, let's go higher. And that's the thing that makes him feel better, right? And like, that's when the engine failed. And there, I think, are some asked and unasked questions in this book around like karma and who's deserving of what punishments and so on. And like Elizabeth, for example, wrestles with, it's so unfair that George emerges basically unscathed and Enid emerges with this paralysis when she saved his life, plus he'd been cheating on her, right? There is this potentially implied thing of like, was he greedy? Was he greedy by cheating on Enid and not settling for someone who's nice and loyal to him, and by wanting this, excitement or whatever? And then in the plane, he gets greedy with the flying up. Although in the end, we find out he didn't do anything safety wrong, and it was the defect on the plane. So he's not at fault in that way, but yeah.
So it's kind of like Icarus. Is that what you're thinking of?
Yeah.
Flying too close to the sun. That makes sense to me. I do like the idea.
Were you expecting me to not know who Icarus is?
No, I was expecting you to.
I do know her.
I know you know her. I was expecting you to name her so that I could put her in our works cited.
Okay, well.
Todd's over and he witnesses what's happening.
He calls the police, which I have to say is propaganda. There is no reason that your first phone call needs to be to the police. They talk about how police cars came and they did also have ambulances. I'm like, you could just have ambulances. We don't need to turn this into a criminal matter. We don't need to involve the police system at this point. Let's worry about our health.
I agree. I just wish we lived in a system in Sweet Valley in the 80s where you could just call an ambulance line without having to call the cops, but such as
so you think it's a fault of the system or a fault of Todd? I was blaming it on Todd for calling the police. It didn't say he called 911 and they sent the police. It said he called the police.
Oh,
ambulance had also already been called, and so had police.
Oh, I assumed he had called 911 and they routed him. I was not faulting Todd for that. I think for me, kind of having a critical analysis of power, it's really important to look at the structures and systems that govern our lives and not place kind of individual blame. But I guess that's just me.
Yeah, I do too. And Todd picked up the payphone and panted, "Get me the police," into it.
Okay.
Okay.
There is just one interesting moment where Todd goes, "Does anyone know what happened to the people in the plane?" And Ken Matthews goes, "We don't know yet, but it's not just people, Todd. According to Robin Wilson, it's George Warren and Enid Rollins." And I totally understand that, like, yes, when you know people who are involved in the tragedy, it is more tragic for you than when you don't. But something about saying it's not just people was like, oh, that feels a little messed up.
Doesn't it feel so accurate, though, to how that would be? Like,
Yes.
That is that mental shift of, like, where you are just a sort of observer and, oh, I'm lucky it's not me kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Or like, oh, that's so sad, people died, or something bad happened. To like, oh my God, that's not people, that's
my people.
That's my people. Yeah, like, that does feel real in that way. So yeah, I don't know.
We then cut back to Elizabeth and Jess. And I had full on completely forgotten the plot of the last book, because Elizabeth and Jess and the Wakefields are at the police station. And I highlighted this line: "The entire Wakefield family, with the exception of Stephen, the twins' older brother, who was off at college, had gathered in the police station to fill out a report that Jack Howard, the boy that Jessica had been dating, threatened her life." And I highlighted that at the moment because I was like, oh my God, all of this stuff happened and they didn't even include it in the previous book. And then I realized, of course, that it had happened in the previous book. I had just forgotten about it.
That's very, very funny. And I think it's actually worth summarizing very briefly because it's going to become relevant to the B plot at the cooking with Jessica and Lila. What happened, which was that this guy was dating Jessica and Lila at once, same time, and like Jessica knew that was going on. Lila didn't know it was going on, and like in the end, that all kind of turned out to be sort of moot because he turned out to be like a violent, delusional person who like threatened Jessica at knife point in addition to like other stuff. But like when this book starts, like Jessica and Lila, rather than the expected outcome of like them bonding over that and like, thank God we're okay and like I love you and I'm sorry and like let's be friends and good and go against this guy, it was like Lila just found out what was happening on the phone and like they haven't talked since. And then in this book, it starts with them in a cooking class, still not talking. So when the Wakefields are at the police station and they find out about the plane issue, Jessica's reaction.
Yes, that's highlighted in my text. It's so bizarre.
So Elizabeth's like, Enid's in that plane. She might be in terrible danger. Her blue-green eyes wide with horror. I'll die if anything happens to Enid, Jessica exclaimed, putting her arms around her twin.
Come on, Jessica wailed, tugging at her mother's hand. We've got to go see what happened to George and Enid. It's like, what? You care? Why do you care? What's going on?
But then later in the book, it is explicitly stated that like Jessica usually doesn't give a shit about Enid, but now she thinks she's interesting because of this whole plane crash thing.
Which is like, totally believable to me. Like, there's going to be such good gossip about this. I need to get in on the ground floor.
Of course, Alice's reaction is denial. Oh no, this can't be happening.
I mean, that's the best Alice does this whole book. She is, spoiler alert and trigger warning for people who have complicated relationships with their parents. The Wakefields in this book are so truly and completely horrific that it truly boggles the mind and it raises the hairs on the back of one's neck.
Every time we think Alice and Ned and Elizabeth and Stephen are complicit, but I'm going to put the blame on the adults here, Alice and Ned. Okay, they're the ones really kind of setting the tone in the household.
Yeah.
Every time we think they can't get any lower.
Oh my gosh.
They
can.
But I think that brings us to SVHICU because we are back at Fowler Memorial.
And we've got a new doc on the scene, Dr. McGregor, and he's talking to Mrs. Rollins, Enid's mom.
He is a breath of fresh air compared to Dr. John Edwards, I have to say. And
oh, yeah, duh. You mean he's not like a pervert?
Not only is he not a pervert, he has a moment of providing information that I absolutely loved, which is pretty much right away he goes, okay, she's paralyzed. Okay. And he explains exactly the injury, what we didn't get with John Edwards. He goes, well, she hit herself very hard at the base of the spine. I'm afraid the force of the blow was enough to damage the last disc in her spine. It's cutting off nerve communication to her legs. So we know here there's a demonstrated neurological problem. Okay.
Yes.
What does that mean, Dr. McGregor? She's paralyzed. There's hope, he said, taking a piece of paper out of the file. We think an operation may relieve the pressure, but we won't know for a few days whether or not we can operate. We have to wait for the swelling to come down. Hey, whatever happened with the piece of paper he took out? Let's not follow it up on. So yeah, I just love that. I just loved getting that just little pithy explanation from him. Thank you, Dr. McGregor.
You saw what information we needed. You provided it to us. You did not touch us inappropriately, even once. And at this point, you also have not created undue expectations on other people to be responsible for the patient's healing. Stay tuned to see if that remains true.
Ultimately,
Ultimately, you veer off the path, Dr. McGregor, but you start out pretty well.
We learn, like, we get now some of George and his kind of bedside guilt. We're very familiar with bedside guilt at this point. We also learned that George is waiting on the Federal Aviation Administration has to do a analysis of figuring out what caused the engine failure. George is convinced that it was an error on his part. And so he's feeling a lot of guilt right now. And we get another sort of asynchronous communication similar to when Elizabeth was in the coma. We get here actually different to when Elizabeth was in the coma. We actually see here specifically that Enid's drugs were so powerful. It says she couldn't feel his arms around her. I think it's implied she couldn't hear him, but basically he professes all his guilt to her. Yeah.
And he says, I couldn't possibly tell you about Robin now, not after all this. I'm going to keep it a secret.
And then, we get Elizabeth can't sleep and she's kind of just consumed with anger. And it's this kind of karma thing of like, it wasn't fair, Elizabeth thought, turning over and pushing her face in the pillow. It's not fair that George should just walk away with a few stitches while Enid... The irony was too much for Elizabeth to bear.
I hate to be one of those people who litigates whether something is ironic or not. And maybe it is ironic. Let's just cut this. I hate when people that's not really irony, but I'm not totally convinced that this is irony.
But Robert, therein is the point, which is that this is actually so useful because listen.
Oh no.
Don't be rude.
Sorry.
They don't know it, right? So rude. Okay, because listen. All right. I'm right on this. Irony is when the thing that you
I don't want to do this.
No, just you started this.
I know, and then I tried to end it.
And just like how Stephen tried to take back his promise, you liked to blame him for being the starter of the conversation and being the one who brought it up. And so that is you being what it has happened here today. Let me just
how dare you use my own analysis, my own brilliant and beautiful and insightful analysis against me?
Famously, the real thing of the irony is we've all seen Reality Bites, okay? It's the one.
Wait, I haven't?
Wait, really? Let's hang up, go watch it now. It's so good.
I don't want to.
Whatever. Irony is, right? Something to the effect of when the thing you would expect to happen and the actual thing that happens is basically opposites, or when the outcome is the opposite you would expect, or when someone says something that would be the opposite of what you would have been set up to expect by the thing right? Mm-hmm. So it's that type of thing. What is often whatever it is, and Alanis Morissette, blah blah blah, is just a unfortunate coincidence or a thing that is a bummer. Okay, that is not the same thing as irony structurally in that sense. Right. However, what I want to say of why it's actually meaningful or useful is that what you pointed out was that Elizabeth is misinterpreting irony here, right?
Oh.
But that's meaningful because it shows Elizabeth's perspective. By reading it as irony, she's actually stating her worldview, which is that bad things should happen to bad people.
Oh, okay.
What she's saying is This is ironic because based on George having been a cheater and based on Enid being the kindest, goodest person she ever knew, Enid should have been the one to walk away unscathed and George should have his fucked up legs. So by positioning it as ironic, she's articulating that kind of moral worldview.
I love that. Really skillfully done. I retract my oh no.
Irony. Irony. It's a noun. It's when something is ironic. It's well, I can't really define irony, but I know when I see it.
Chapter 2 ends with kind of this, again, misunderstanding of how healing works.
Yes.
Where she has to pray the operation would help, and she had to pray, however much it sickened her, that George would forget Robin now and give Enid all the love and attention he had. Because without that, Elizabeth knew, Enid might never recover at all. And it's just like such a misunderstanding of health in the human body and recovery. And like, she starts in on this, like she introduces to us at least this idea that George owes it to Enid to stay with her because of this situation.
Like the human body, but also the emotional aspect of like, theoretically, like to stay with someone who you don't love, to support them could work. But in reality, like the reason it doesn't end up working is because you can't fake loving someone. Like you can support someone, but you can't fake love, right? And so it's like at the end of the day, that's bad. It ends up being bad for both people, and you shouldn't stay in an unhappy thing or whatever, right?
Ooh, we're sealing the package of graham crackers. That's optimistic in a way that I don't believe.
It's a Ziploc. That seal is
Yeah.
permeable. Okay, now we get into some fun. I mean, we have the gourmet cooking class. This is delightful. Okay, so what's happened, guys, is Jessica and Lila, before they're falling out, vis-a-vis knife point.
Vis-a-vis knife point.
Apparently, Lila had talked Jessica into signing up for this French cooking class at the Civic Center, which, of course, we remember the Civic Center from previous storylines. And now Jessica is like, well, why did I sign up for this? Lila and I aren't even talking and I have to make fucking mustard. But then things turn up because guess who shows up?
It is, of course, Monsieur Baptiste, Jean-Pierre Baptiste.
Oh, wait, sorry. Before we actually get him, we get actually a very simple truce between Jessica and Lila where they sort of talk a little shit to each other, spill a little mustard. And then Jessica's like, I had my life threatened. Like, why are you mad at me? And Lila's like, Jack never told me he was seeing you. It wasn't very nice of you, Jess. Just consider it for a moment. I guess it wasn't, she admitted. I guess he deceived both of us, huh? Truce. And that's literally the end of it.
I love it. I like Jessica. Jessica is just like, oh yeah, that actually wasn't really nice of me. I'm sorry.
She doesn't go as far as saying, I'm sorry.
You're right, she doesn't.
But she says, I guess it wasn't, and we will absolutely take it.
I also like the mean psychology we get. Usually Jessica didn't think twice about stealing a boy from someone else, but she didn't want Lila to think she was so hard up for guys she had to get them secondhand.
Yeah, like it's not that she apologizes because she realizes the wrong thing to do to her good friend.
So in comes Jean-Pierre Baptiste. He's the author of several cookbooks and the youngest head chef ever at La Maison Blanche, one of the finest French restaurants in California. Now, just from that, I'm like, okay, youngest head chef ever. That must mean he's at least mid-20s at the very, 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 very youngest. And before
it describes him as his early 20s.
Well, yeah, but I'm just talking about when I'm reading along chronologically.
Sorry.
So I hear he's the youngest head chef ever. I'm like, oh, he's got to be at least mid-20s. And then immediately I stop reading and my heart sinks because I'm like, oh God, Jessica is going to get a crush on this completely age inappropriate grown man. And she does get a crush on this incredibly age inappropriate young man. Now, he's well over 6 feet tall, his broad shoulders tapering down to a slender waist. He had jet black hair worn a bit longer than that of most of the guys Jessica knew at school, how European, and chiseled features that looked like those of one of the statues she'd seen in slides in her art class. And his eyes. Jessica had never seen such intense blue eyes before. Now, we get described that he is in his early 20s. I think it's unlikely that he is in his early 20s. I think he's probably in his mid to late 20s.
But like, it doesn't say he appeared to be in his early 20s. Like, it's telling us pretty straight up he was in his early 20s.
Okay, fine. I mean, if you want to do that kind of simplistic, like we just believe whatever the book says, cool. I think it's a fun way to approach this, just kind of as simply as possible. I have reason to believe he is older than his early 20s that appears towards the end of the text that I will not reveal yet because that would be a spoiler.
Fine. Jessica decides she's in love. She daydreams kissing him under the Eiffel Tower, becomes very interested in making a very nice good mustard. She makes white wine and vinegar and a pinch of sugar and salt into the brownish yellow powder. And then she decides she's going to get him to take her to the school dance in a few weeks. And that is going to be the goal here of this one. This
so gross and so weird. I just it makes me so sad to think about these teenage girls lusting after adult men and trying to trick them into going to high school dances. And it makes it even sadder to me that I know that in the real world outside of these books, there are tons and tons of high school girls who take adult men to their dances. And it's gross. And I feel very sad.
Wait, what? They do?
Was there nobody at your high school who dated an older guy and it was oh, that's wrong?
Dating an older guy or bringing an older guy to dance? You know what I mean? First of all, I don't think we really had any dances except for our prom. I don't imagine school functions where there's adult men there. No. Did you have that? It's a school dances? Just full on adults? That's creepy. That's weird.
I am thinking about I do think that some high school girls brought adult men to homecoming.
It's disgusting.
It's very, very gross. Then Lila and Jess are heading home from the cooking class, and Jess asks if they can stop off at Robin's house so they can talk cheerleading quickly. And while they drive by, they see George's car, a light blue GTO, in Robin's driveway. And Jess puts together that Robin and George are having an affair right under Enid's nose.
A couple interesting things to me here is so Jessica sees George's GTO at Robin's place and sort of puts together, okay, they're cheating. But there's this moment of she doesn't seem to want Lila to know, or Jess is oh, we'll come back later or something. And Lila's why, what's going on or something? Or there's this sense of Jessica's trying not to have her in on it. And then based on that and Jessica's initial reaction of sympathy for Enid at the police station, when I initially reread this, I was oh my gosh, maybe Jessica growth. She's trying to not be gossiping and not trying to spread rumors. But then a couple pages later, she runs to tell Kara that it's she doesn't tell Lila, and then she goes home and talks about it with Liz and is and I won't tell anyone, Liz, but then she runs and tell Kara. What was the point of that? Was there any point? You know what I mean? Of the seemingly she doesn't want to tell Lila? Is it just because she's still testy about whatever?
I think it might be that she's just not as truced with Lila as she thought, potentially.
Mm-hmm. The whole thing I had got to say with the GTO was a bit of a jimble jamble plot situation that we've talked about of where things get unnecessarily heightened to where it becomes overcomplicated, which is to say what happens with the GTO is that they see it there. They're okay, well, I guess they're having an affair.
Right.
George and Robin. Jessica goes home, tells Liz his car was in the thing. What we learn actually had happened, because we then get it from George's perspective, is that he had gone over to Robin's to break up with her or to tell her in person this isn't going to continue, I'm going to just be there for Enid. She hadn't been home, so he wasn't able to deliver that message, so he then did it over the phone later. But what this then causes to happen is that Liz and Jess are both under the impression that this affair is still going on, and that quote unquote a misunderstanding or delta between the reality of what's going on in their perception gives this motivation of them being cruel to George and Robin for a while until quote unquote is cleared up. But it's all very jibble jambly, and that's what gives Liz the supposed moral high ground. Yeah. She's pissed at George the whole time, but it's sort of is that really? Because I don't know. It's just a car in a driveway is not exactly evidence make.
No.
If we're journalists, if we're investigative journalists.
If we're being objective, as Liz, prides herself on being. Yeah, and it also it's just kind of weird because it's so it's I mean, maybe I'm saying this because I have the knowledge of what actually happens, but it's like immediately after the accident, George's car is at Robin's house, and then they're never seen together again. And they assume, oh, this affair is still happening, when I would just assume like, oh, it's not. I don't know. I just would not assume. I don't know. Jess rushes home, tells Liz. Liz gets so angry. How dare he? How dare he go over and see Robin while Enid's lying helplessly in that hospital bed?
Maybe it's also just like she has to be angry and that's processing grief. It's like it's like her anger at George maybe and is like serving something of like, just how could this happen, right? Like, how could this happen to Enid? How could she be paralyzed? Like, just how does Elizabeth deal with that? Maybe it's part of that.
That makes sense to me. I think a lot of her anger is at like the unfair circumstances of it all, when it's just like, why is this bad thing happening?
Mm-hmm. So Jess and Liz both are like, okay, well, I guess they're still cheating, or I guess they're cheating or whatever. And Jess is like, I promise I won't tell anyone. And then the next chapter, she runs and tells Kara.
And then we get the great line that you alluded to earlier. In Jessica's opinion, Enid Rollins was just plain boring, but the accident had changed Enid in Jessica's eyes. Now Sweet Valley High was buzzing with talk about Enid. Everybody wondered how she was feeling, if there was any progress, any hope. It was all terribly exciting. And naturally, Jessica, as the twin sister of Enid's very best friend, was right at the center of the speculation. And then we do get like a little bit of a human moment where she says, moreover, Jessica really did feel sorry for Enid. She had never really thought much of George Warren one way or another, but now she was prepared to see him as a villain.
And Robin Wilson, whom Jessica had become rather fond of over the past few months, suddenly seemed like an evil temptress. And so what Jessica decides to do and tells her friends is that they're going to do a cold war against Robin and basically just ice her out as like punishment for this. What I think is so interesting is like as we talked about in Promises, sometimes the way that Jess like shows loyalty to people is to like be cruel to other people that she thinks is hurting them. Right? So like, remember in Promises, we talked about like, oh, is she maybe justifying her mistreatment of Betsy because like she thinks it's actually in the long run actually better for Stephen, and that's who she really has her loyalties to, kind of thing. And with this, it says like, moreover, Jessica really did feel sorry for Enid. And then it says, so now she's prepared to see George as a villain and she's prepared to see Robin as a villain. So it's like, so there could be, in addition to other things, a seed of actual desire to be loyal there that like is getting twisted into this cruelty. But like, it kind of reminds me with like Caroline Pierce, like when she went up to Elizabeth and tried to be nice to her by like sharing some information that she thought would be useful, and it ended up doing all kinds of harm. So they end up doing this cold war on Robin. They're not telling her where cheerleading practice is. They're kind of just not really responding to her.
And so Robin has the response that is very relatable to me, and I assume is relatable to people who have tried to aggressively change their body through editing their dietary choices, often through disordered eating patterns, where she's really upset that everyone is icing her out, and she starts looking hungrily at the ice cream that Kara had left uneaten in her bowl. Robin couldn't help it. When she got lonely or upset, she ate, and right now she was lonely and upset. And so we see that Robin returns to food for comfort as she tries to navigate the difficult time that she's having. And she even, horror of horrors, gains a little weight, and her clothes don't fit her as well as they used to.
Which maybe is also a punishment. Like, remember we talked about when she lost weight and how Elizabeth frames it as like there's a moral component to like like beauty was like a reward for, you know, discipline.
Right.
Now she has shown lack of discipline and she gets punished by having to get fat again. And Liz is just so cold. Robin's experience of this whole thing is interesting. Like she's on the beach with everyone when they see the plane crash, and I don't think we mentioned it, but at the beginning of the book, she faints when she realizes George is in the plane. And everyone's kind of like, oh, she took that hard. And that's part of what leads Jessica to later be like, oh, I guess she's cheating with him or something. One of the things I've learned with bereavement is like concept of sanctioned and unsanctioned grief, which is like this idea that depending on like cultural norms and like society things, different types of grief are like sanctioned or like recognized or considered legitimate or supported in different societies. And then there's other types of grief that could be like not given that recognition or support. For example, if the way someone died is stigmatized, that loss may not be, the grief may not be sanctioned in the same way. Or if there's a case of infidelity and the person who was cheating dies, the person they were cheating with, say the mistress, for example, not being welcome at a funeral, or just their grief not being visible, like in the world, right? Because they've done bad thing. People may or may not even know that they exist, or that relationship was never either made visible or made legible or made legit to society. So whereas like the wife of the dying guy is going to get all kinds of hopefully societal support,
Right.
the mistress is not going to get any support. I felt sad for Robin. I felt compassion for Robin because I felt like part of what she's experiencing is a little bit of like unsanctioned grief about this whole situation, where it's like, no one knows that she has this emotional stake in this closeness with George, and like she can't really share how she's feeling about all of this. It's, she witnessed this plane crash. I mean, it's a lot. So I felt for her.
Yeah, I like that idea of sanctioned and unsanctioned grief. I think that's a really useful way to think about like how she's kind of coping and why she's having a harder time than you might expect her to be having.
Like they were just about to make it work, and like she feels like she can't have that now, and she can't like cry about that to anyone. So sad. Yeah. Anyway, that's where the ice cream comes in.
Can we just get one quick moment about they're talking about Jessica in the cooking class, and she's made a raspberry torte, and Enid is like kind of, I don't want to beat up on Enid because she is the mouthpiece for what everybody seems to believe about Jess. But Enid goes, it looks awfully good, not like Jess. Are you sure Jessica made it herself? And it just really frustrated and hurt my feelings that like Jess is showing real passion and real aptitude for this, and everyone has to undercut her and think like, oh, there's no way she could do this. It just was it was hard for me personally.
He can't do anything right. Literally. It's so unfair. And Elizabeth is still believing this thing of like, she knew what Enid needed more than anything in the world was George's love. Like she thinks that's really what's going to fix this whole thing.
And then we cut to George, and George basically is feeling the same kind of tension. And he's like, it's very hard for me. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to go through with this. Just being with Enid makes me feel so cheap, so dishonest. But he had no other alternative, he reminded himself. He had to pull himself together and act as though nothing was wrong. He just had to. So he feels all of this pressure about needing to perform his love for Enid. And it's just like kind of everyone has bought into the idea that George is responsible for Enid's health and safety.
And happiness. Mm-hmm. All right, Operation Day.
Operation Day.
George and Liz are both at the hospital. He tells Liz that it's over with Robin. She doesn't believe him because of the famous GTO in their driveway.
Of course.
Then we get to puff pastry.
The one thing I do, and this is not interesting, but it is something that I notice more with this book than any other book. They often describe someone with these kind of like useless terms. So a pretty young nurse comes in with a clipboard in her hand, and they often just kind of throwaway describe minor characters as like just pretty or attractive or handsome with no real words there at all. And it just is so... it's just frustrating to me because it's like, why are we so focused on these vapid, empty, insignificant descriptors of people that are not helpful? It didn't help me picture this young nurse anymore in my mind to know that she's pretty and young, and her being pretty and young isn't a point. It just like reinforces this idea that there's only one way to be attractive and that only attractive people matter. And like, if you're going to be a character in these texts, you have to be beautiful.
Yeah, and that like how you look is the most important thing to describe about you. It's totally ubiquitous. It's just toxic.
And then let's get to that pouf pastrami.
So today we are making pate feuilleté.
Did you not have to take Don't Canadians have to take French?
Okay, but I've never heard of feuilleté.
Well, I know. I mean, I don't know anything. I don't know
like, call my mom and ask how to say it.
Wouldn't hurt.
No, I'm not going to do that. They're making puff pastry.
It's one of the greatest. Oh, sorry. This is one of the greatest challenges a chef can face. We must try very hard to ensure the pastry is light and flaky.
Okay, I believe I have a misspelling of ensure here.
I do too. And I was like, Robert, don't make a big deal out of this, but they do misspell ensure.
Okay.
Just clocking it.
Lila's like, this dough is slimy. I think you had the right idea. Let's get out of here. And Jessica's like, no, I actually think it's really important to learn how to cook now.
Just imagine, Jean-Pierre will take me back to Paris with him and let me cook in one of his restaurants. People will come from all over the world to rave about my light, flaky pastry. And Jean-Pierre will be so impressed he won't be able to stop himself. He'll fall madly in love with me. I loved this fantasy for her because what she is fantasizing about is being a successful chef. And yes, of course, Jean-Pierre is going to fall in love with her because her pastry is so flaky, but the flaky pastry is the foremost thing. And I love that.
Yeah, and like later in the book, as we're going to see Jessica making this plan to make a surprise dinner for her parents' anniversary, a lot of that has to do with her wanting to get, recognition from her parents. And a lot of the joy that she gets out of planning this whole thing is also about the food. And she's enjoying thinking about this and planning the dishes. And I agree with you. She has authentic interest and she has talent. And so it's been nice to see her kind of pursue that and focus on that a little bit in this one. Okay, so and then we get to the meat in terms of like what's going on here with the family dynamics. Jessica grinned as she rolled her dough out flat. She wasn't sick of the class, not at all. And Jean-Pierre wasn't the only reason why she was still interested. Jessica Wakefield had come up with a brilliant idea. For as long as Jessica could remember, Elizabeth had always outshone her when it came to giving gifts. It wasn't that Jessica didn't have good ideas. It was just that Elizabeth was so hard to compete with. Liz was perfect at everything, Jessica thought. And she was organized, thoughtful, loving. She never forgot an important date or failed to come up with a meaningful gift just at the right time or place. The Wakefield's wedding anniversary was the date Jessica had always had the hardest time remembering, and Elizabeth always made her feel like a jerk, giving their parents a present when Jessica had forgotten all about it. But this year I haven't forgotten, she thought with a triumphant smile, and Liz isn't going to show me up this time. So she has the idea to surprise them with a romantic, very special dinner that they will never forget. I'm through with being second best, Jessica told herself. This time I'm going to make mom and dad proud of me.
I love this because I think it really captures kind of the complexity of what's going on in Jessica's head, because she does want to do the right thing and her intentions are good and pure and beautiful. And she also thinks like, it is hard living in Elizabeth's shadow and this will get me out of Elizabeth's shadow. And so I can understand that it's like a both and thing where it's like, she wants to do the right thing for both the right reason and for some kind of like competitive reason. And I like love this picture of her psychology and the fact that she like honestly just wants to be thoughtful and recognized for being thoughtful.
Yeah, and she wants to do something that makes them happy, and she wants to do something that makes them proud, and she wants to show that she has something to offer,
And then we cut back to Operation Day. It went really well, and she should be able to walk again.
Within a short period.
Now, don't expect her to start running. She's not going to jump right out of bed and dance. It may take her a while to get her old legs back, but she's got physical therapy, and after she leaves, she should come back as an outpatient until she's regained use of her leg muscles.
Liz yells at George, feels conflicted, has sympathy for him. She wonders what George will do. Liz also is feeling conflicted about the results of the operation, which is also so interesting, which is that she's like, well, now that the paralysis is cured, what's George going to do? Like, is he going to now leave her? Which is kind of wild,
Yeah, it is weird that this idea that Liz has said, one thing was keeping Elizabeth from sharing in Mrs. Rollins' joy. What was George going to do now that Enid's paralysis had been cured? Wouldn't this free him to do as he chose?
Because like before, she was saying she needs George's love to be able to heal. But it's like, if she's healed, why does she need him now if she just has to do physical therapy for a few weeks or whatever it is,
Yeah.
Okay. And then we get Robin's perspective in the next chapter. We get her really struggling. Everyone's being mean to her. She asked, this, I think we saw in this book one of Elizabeth's, and I don't love to use this word, bitchiest moments to date.
Okay.
So Robin clearly struggling. Clearly everyone has basically turned on her. She asks Liz, will you please go to Casey's with me? I want to talk to you. Liz very reluctantly agrees. Casey's, of course, is the ice cream shop.
Mm.
And when they get to fucking Casey's, okay, and Robin does the normal thing of ordering whatever it is, a sundae, okay, Liz goes, just an iced tea for me. That is hostile, okay? Because she knows how fraught Robin's weight stuff is. They are, and her food stuff is, they are at Casey's.
Mm-hmm.
You go to Casey's to eat ice cream. It's not like we think Liz doesn't eat ice cream. We famously, she could have at least got a root beer. Iced tea is like a diet drink for Liz. You know what I mean? It's like she could have at least got a fucking root beer. And
Root beer float?
Root beer float, exactly. Would have
I
been
love
the
root beer
obvious
float.
choice. I just didn't like it. I said, I see you, Liz.
Yeah,
And she freaks out at Robin.
and then runs away.
And then Jess is like, I want to make dinner one night. And Alice is like, are you sure you're up to it? I liked that the tour guide jobs made a resurgence, just like it came. Remember when in book 5 they had to do the test to be tour guides?
Yeah, I do remember.
Job?
Yeah.
And
She was out all night long.
of course. And so it gets brought up because they're anticipating their summer jobs that they're so excited about. But how are they going to get there? It's a little whiles away, and there's no transportation. And guess what we learned? We learned some big news.
They're getting the Fiat. Vis-a-vis cars.
They're getting the Fiat.
They're getting the Fiat. I was like, this is such an interesting way to get them the Fiat. It like is it's a callback from 15 books earlier. And it's just like such a funny, like, oh, we just got the letters about being a tour guide in 8 months. And in 8 months, it's going to be really hard for us. And they're like, we can have the Fiat now then.
That's why I fucking love these books, okay? Because seeds get planted. Let me tell you something. This isn't a spoiler, but
Oh, yeah, it is.
the Fiat's not going to, I hate to tell you this, but the Fiat is not going to last forever, okay? At some point, there's going to need to be another car after the Fiat. I'm just telling you that now so you can have anticipatory grief. But get your affairs in order. But when the next car does eventually come, I want to say it's 30 books of lead up to it.
Oh, God.
I want to say 30 books of Jessica at breakfast making a case of why they need it, and you will never guess what kind of car it is, and I can't wait for you to find out. And don't bother looking at the TV show for clues, because they did take some creative liberties that I do not approve of with the color and model of that car.
Thank you for letting me know. So they get the car. Ned and Alice are going on a date Friday night. And then Elizabeth asks if Jess has a date Friday night. And Jess is like, no. I mean, I could have a date if I wanted one, but guys our age suddenly seem so babyish to me. Actually, I was planning on getting some cookbooks out of the library to read over the weekend. We're graduating to chicken cordon bleu next week, and I want to be ready. I love it.
Oh, I think we might have not mentioned, but it is worth saying. I think earlier Jess had the comment of like, yeah, he's older, but like things are different in Europe.
Oh, has that happened? Yeah. If we missed that, we are remiss if we don't say that was a truly wild moment. I think, yeah, Lila's like, oh, he's way too old for you. And she was like, oh, it's different in Europe.
But I love that she just has sort of like a never ending sort of Mary Poppins bag of like things. Cause it's like Jeremy Frank was not European.
So we then get this idea that Enid is not going to physical therapy. And at the end of chapter 6, Elizabeth thinks to herself, with the way things were going, it didn't look as if Enid ever planned to get out of that wheelchair. Elizabeth had a terrible feeling that something was bothering Enid, really bothering her. And Elizabeth planned to find out what was going on the very first chance she got. And I'm interested in this because it frames it as if Elizabeth knows something is off, but she doesn't know what is off. But she must know what is off. It was confusing to me because when I was reading that, I was like, oh yeah, Elizabeth has realized that Enid has stopped trying to recover because she senses on some level that once she starts to recover, George is no longer going to be interested in her. But Elizabeth does not actually seem to see that. And she still has to figure it out. And it takes her a long time to still figure it out.
Okay, my reading is that she sees it. She's not ready to explicitly accept it. And the reason I say that is she uses the word planned. She goes, what she thinks to herself is, the way things were going, it didn't look as if Enid ever planned to get out of that wheelchair. That means she has an intuition that there's some intentionality piece. We then get a similar scene where Jessica says something like, well, why would Enid get better? How does she benefit from getting the use of her legs back? Then later she talks to Todd and she's like, I'm not sure what's going on, but things are starting to shape up. I'm still missing a piece. And like, she keeps framing it as this thing that she's sensing, but doesn't quite have the full picture of. So it could be a reading that like, she kind of thinks that's what's happening, you know? But that does take us into, I have done some research on hysterical paralysis. You know, we talked, for example, in the coma and the amnesia, you know, we talked about like how much sometimes of things is like neurological versus psychological in terms of actual like brain injury impacts versus like trauma repression. We've talked about these types of things. With the paralysis piece, according to my small amount of research, it is considered to be neurologically happening. In other words, she is not faking it. Like, in other words, what Elizabeth thinks is actually wrong. Yeah. Maybe I'll share with you a little bit what I learned.
But I need you to. No maybes.
First of all, I have to give a shout out to the Cleveland Clinic.
Sure, of course. They do great work.
No, seriously though. Seriously, because listen, I looked at a bunch of different sources. You know, I looked at Wikipedia. I looked at some journal articles. I looked at some whatever. And the Cleveland Clinic has the most plain language summary page, and it was just so accessible and a delight to go through. Okay, so what we now would call conversion disorder,
Thank you,
was formerly called hysterical paralysis. According to Cleveland Clinic, conversion disorder is a condition where a mental health issue disrupts how your brain works. This causes real physical symptoms that a person can't control. Symptoms can include seizures, weakness, paralysis, or It's often treatable through various types of therapy, which could include like physical therapy and also sometimes things like hypnosis and psychotherapy and stuff.
Sure.
It's important to know that conversion disorder is a real mental health condition. It's not faking or attention seeking. It is not something just in a person's head or that they've imagined. While it's a mental health condition, the physical symptoms are still real. A person with conversion disorder cannot control the systems just by trying or thinking about it. And I read that when they do the neurological testing, someone with conversion disorder has that neurological thing messed up. So literally the brain is not sending signals. If that's what Enid has, then if Enid got a test, it would say like brain is not sending signals to legs. It is very uncommon. Experts estimate 4 to 12 people out of every 100,000 each year, but it's also very hard to diagnose. Okay, this is something I highlighted because I said this sounds like Enid. People with conversion disorder often seem like they're not worried about their symptoms. Mm-hmm. This phenomenon, la Belle Indifference, which is French for beautiful ignorance, happens most commonly with conversion disorder. It isn't necessarily a symptom. But that was interesting to me because I thought like that does seem consistent with how Enid behaves, which is she's not necessarily freaking out about like the doctor says I should be able to walk, why can't I walk kind of thing. Experts don't know why it happens. Common circumstances in people with conversion disorder include history of child abuse, other mental health conditions, a recent stressful or traumatic event. There's treatments, occupational therapy, physiotherapy, cognitive therapy, hypnosis, EMDR. But what I did not see listed as a treatment was duress vis-a-vis child thrown in pool.
Yeah, spoiler alert. Yeah. Creating a tragedy.
All right, to wrap that up, like I think the implication for us is that the idea that Enid is in control of this even subconsciously due to like a sort of subconscious need or desire or something, I think according to Cleveland Clinic told us, I think would be not consistent with the medical literature.
That makes sense to me. If that is in fact what she has, which it seems still unclear.
Mm-hmm.
Enid and George come over to the Wakefields for a double date on Friday. Did you clock what Elizabeth made?
Yeah, but I just have to say, this is the most awkward dinner party in history.
But what does Elizabeth make for them? And they all go wild. This looks so wonderful, Liz. Fucking spaghetti salad and brownies. Spaghetti.
But isn't it the famous Wakefield sauce?
It's like, I'm sorry. Jessica is making a fucking raspberry tort. She is making puff pastry that is so great that Jean-Pierre Baptiste himself, the youngest head chef, is praising her to high heaven. And Elizabeth is getting all of this credit for making fucking spaghetti.
Say that.
Yeah, I am. I think they do such a good job in this text of getting us into the head of Jessica, feeling underappreciated, misunderstood, hurt, walked over, etc.
I totally agree with you that it's outrageous, but fuck, marry, kill, spaghetti salad, chocolate brownies. And I do want to say the spaghetti was with her mother's tried and true recipe for spaghetti sauce. So that is what it is. What it is. I don't want to tell you about that sauce, but
I'm marrying the salad. I'm fucking the brownies. I'm killing the spaghetti, and I'm angry that she thinks spaghetti is okay to serve me at a dinner party. So I'm angrily killing the spaghetti.
I'm marrying the spaghetti, fucking the salad, and putting away the brownies. I don't think they're gonna be that good. I love spaghetti.
Do you love spaghetti?
I love pasta. Homemade tomato sauce is probably so good. I like salad too, though, but I'd rather have spaghetti every day.
Makes sense to me.
I have to think about my poops, but hopefully the tomatoes and the spaghetti is going to give enough vegetable that the poops will keep going.
Yeah, the fiber I think will help.
Maybe it's whole wheat. No, I don't want whole wheat spaghetti. Okay. Liz is disappointed to see that Enid has shown up and she is still using the wheelchair. She thought she'd be walking by now. Enid is being fake cheerful. We sort of learned she's been kind of avoiding physical therapy. Everyone feels awkward.
And then George gets himself out of there.
George gets himself out of there and asks Liz and Todd to drive Enid home. And she's like, you can't actually take me now, which leads them to leave the dishes in the sink.
Kind of a Pascal's gun, so to speak.
I can't even say what happens because it's so angering. And it's my blood pressure.
So Jessica comes home. She's looking through cookbooks. She's planning all sorts of stuff. She was excited.
She's being an angel. She's being a sweet angel. She's doing the most wholesome, good, kind, nice, sweet thing a young girl could do. She's lying in bed, fantasizing about what she's going to cook, looking at cookbooks, and how she's going to make her nice parents happy with a filet mignon.
Lying back on her bed and closing her eyes, she imagined the expressions of love and joy on her parents' faces as she led them into the dining room. Dinner is served, she would say, clapping her hands, and instantly the table would be spread with exotic dishes. Chicken cordon bleu, filet mignon, veal piccata. And then what interrupts her reverie?
Two demons.
Her mother's shrill, evil voice. Jessica Wakefield, are you in there? Jessica sat up in confusion, listening to the angry knocking on her bedroom door. Of course I'm in here. Since when do you leave a pile of dirty dishes in the sink and not even bother to rinse them? Do you realize that your father and I've had a long day and the last thing we want to find when we come home this late is a filthy mess in the kitchen? But Mom, I didn't. Don't interrupt. Mr. Wakefield, a human devil, echoed. Your mother is right, Jessica. We agreed to let you take cooking classes, but we didn't agree to let you turn our kitchen into a demolition derby. It wasn't me. I've been at Kara's all night. I just got home a few minutes ago, and I didn't even go in the kitchen. Oh, that's right, Mrs. Wakefield said, blinking. Liz had Enid over to dinner. I'd forgotten. Foiled again, Mr. Wakefield said. Sorry, Jess, your middle-aged parents are getting senile early. I wonder why Liz left a mess. Did you see her, Jess, or did she... I don't know where she is. I can't believe you just assume any mess around this place is my fault. Sorry, Miss Wakefield said lightly. Don't look so upset, Jess. It's hard keeping track of things when you have twins. I bet it is, Jessica said sulkily. I just bet. If I'd made a mess down there, no one would have accused Liz. That isn't true, Jess. I'll have a word with Liz when she gets back. But I'm sure there's a logical explanation. Of course there is, Jessica thought, because it's Elizabeth. If it were me, you'd be ready to have me hung. While we're on the subject of demolition derbies, Mr. Wakefield joked, maybe it's time you did something to this room, Jess. Jessica didn't answer. I'll show them. I'll make them the best dinner they've ever eaten. And they'll be so sorry they insulted me, they'll just beg me to forgive them. Filet mignon, Jessica wrote in her notebook, trying not to feel hurt. That would teach them. She was sick and tired of being the one everyone picked on.
It's just, in a way, it's satisfying because it's like finally everything that's been not under the surface, but like, it's like, yeah, like this has been culminating in like she should feel frustrated. I feel so frustrated for her. Her parents are so rude. The fact that they go off on her for so long about the dishes, and then when she corrects them, they're so lighthearted about their like little apology. It's like, oh well, sorry. Well, it's so hard keeping track of what. And then her mom has the nerve to say, I'm sure Liz has a logical explanation, and then her dad has the nerve to make a comment about the messy room. It's like, can you please go fuck off, go get shot from a cannon up into the universe of the sky, and don't ever come back to our planet, okay? And it's just the height of, again, injustice that, like, again, never forget that it's book 20 and Jessica has been assaulted probably 19 times. Elizabeth has been, of course, abducted, coma, whatnot else, some of the assault attempts of her own. And, you know, Ned and Alice just freaking skate by on the surface of life, having a giggle about their fucking coffee. They are negligent. They are abusive. They deserve to be in a well.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote in huge block letters, so unfair, with a bunch of exclamation points.
I love the way that this book is able to get us into the head of a 16-year-old, because I just really did. It took
so
me back to
unfair.
being 16. I was just like, I was having all the feelings Jessica has. And if anybody out there has a complicated relationship with your parents, like, it really does feel.
Or they ever seen you do that thing, even though sometimes you might have not even did it that bad thing that time, and actually someone else maybe did it.
And like, all you want to do is like do something nice for them, but they won't even take their heads out of their own asses for long enough to see that you're doing something nice. And they're just so busy focused on everything you do wrong, even when you're not even doing anything wrong. You're just planning a meal.
Yeah, just because that one time I stole my mom's credit card and called the second network and I talked to them for 2 hours.
Is that true?
I had a vague idea of what cordon bleu
Is that true?
Not exactly, but it is inspired by a true story. It is true, yeah. Did you know what chicken cordon bleu is?
I assume it's like breaded, like pounded thin chicken patty. There's ham and cheese, and it's rolled up and breaded and fried.
You're on fire. You are on fire.
Chapter 8 begins with Enid waiting around for George, and she senses that George has been acting strangely. She's reading Cosmo, and the article is How to Tell If He Doesn't Love You Anymore. And she's caught in this thing where she's like, why is he acting strangely? Does he not love me? No, he does love me. He must just feel strange. He thinks this is his fault. She thinks she's never going to get better, and she's scared to tell anybody. And then George comes over, although he's late. Enid wants to go to the dance. George is kind of weird about it. And Enid's like, are you mad at me? What's going on? And then she says, George, it scares me so much when you don't come by to see me. I don't know what I'd do without you. You're just about all I've got left now.
Basically, like, she senses his distance, and that makes her, and she becomes like more needy and desperate.
And then finally, thankfully, we get to graduate to the entree. It's cooking class. And Jessica's planning to ask Jean-Pierre if he wants to go to the dance on Friday night. Lila's eyebrows shot up. Are you really serious about that? Don't you think he's a little old for a high school dance? Well, it isn't as if he'd just be going with anyone. He's probably got a real thing for American girls. Frenchmen always do in movies. Besides, haven't you noticed the way he looks at me?
And then Jean-Pierre tells her that she's a good chef and she should enroll in the intermediate class. And Jessica's getting ready for him to fall in love with her and profess that to her. And she's kind of just bracing herself to hear these words from him when
the door opens and a redhead bursts in. So it's this beautiful redhead. Jessica, this is Lisbeth, my wife. Thanks for the lesson. And then she gets up and leaves. The fact that he is married to Lisbeth makes me think that he is likely out of his early 20s. No?
Well, it's like, on the one hand, that is the evidence for that. On the other hand is the evidence that they explicitly have told us in no uncertain terms that he is in his early 20s. And I don't know. You need his long form birth certificate. Like, I don't know what to tell you.
Jessica's really lucky that Lisbeth rushed in and she didn't embarrass herself, but she vows that she'll still learn to be a good cook. It would be worth it to prove to her parents for once in her life that she could do something better than Elizabeth. And Jean-Pierre or no Jean-Pierre, she was going to do it.
Best line ever. Jessica's thinking to herself, thank goodness I didn't make a fool of myself by asking him to the dance. And he looked so unmarried. I mean, are you going to comment on it or am I going to comment on it?
Comment on
Don't say what. Do not you dare say what right now. Do not you dare.
Okay. Quoi?
Elizabeth.
Oh my God, we didn't even notice. Very nice. Because everyone is picking Elizabeth over Jessica. She's always second best. Then we get Todd and Elizabeth talking about Enid being depressed and trying to figure out how to help her out.
He's like, it might just take her a while to recover. And she's like, I think it's more complicated than that. He's like, what do you mean? And she goes, well, I think it has something to do with George. I'm not sure how it all fits together yet, but I'm sure that Enid senses something is wrong between them. She keeps trying to act like there isn't. I can see it in her eyes, maybe. And she's like, I don't know, but
yeah, it's interesting because Elizabeth is normally so good at figuring this stuff out and she has such good hunches, and it's weird that she is unable to do so.
But I feel like it's because it's like, it's a sort of taboo thing to suggest because it sort of is implying, at least from that perspective, that there's a faking. It's a sort of a scary thing. Like imagine my fucking legs are paralyzed and you're like,
God forbid.
And you're like, are you sure you're not just like doing that subconsciously to hold on to George? Like, I feel like that's so rude.
Yeah, I guess it is a rude thing to say.
And it's just a sort of like wild thing to even suggest. She's like, yeah, I literally can't move them, which again is true. And Elizabeth's reading is a misunderstanding of apparently the actual kind of medical realities of this according to literature. But given the sort of worldview of Elizabeth, within that.
Yeah. So
it's a hard thing to tell someone.
It is a hard thing.
And that's coming from someone who did fake a coma.
So. Enid and Liz are talking. Enid's feeling guilty. She's worried that George hates her. She blames herself. Then we get to cut to the dance. Interestingly, Jessica doesn't get to go with Jean-Pierre, but she does scare up at the last minute who I would think would be a pretty hot ticket, Ken Matthews. Captain of the football team, blonde, clean cut, undeniably one of the cutest and most popular guys in school.
Yeah, in a way, Ken and Neil, I think, have in common the fact of being like objectively a hot ticket, but boring to Jessica in the sense that like they don't give her excitement. And like Ken is just sort of, she's always bored by Ken, but he is sort of like quote unquote fun at parties and like everyone likes him and he's cute.
I'm just surprised he was left there. I'm surprised he was still on the shelf when she was looking for a different suitor from Jean-Pierre. So at the dance, Mr. Collins is wearing a white linen jacket and navy blue trousers, and he is dancing with Nora Dalton, the beautiful young French teacher. Looks like that's getting pretty serious, don't you think? Ken chuckled. Remember, of course, that there was that rumor about Ken dating Mrs. Dalton, or Miss Dalton. So it's interesting that he's got such close eyes on that.
And I think this is actually the second time that came from Ken. I think the previous book, when they were first seen together, Ken was also the one to draw attention to it because I think that we mentioned it then too. So that's interesting. He always has eyes on them.
Lila's like, wait, why are you with Ken? Why aren't you with Jean-Pierre? And Jessica airily says, oh, he's way too old for me. I wasn't serious about him anyway. Ken is much more fun. And she's like, you're great, Jessica.
Lila says like something that is so wild in the sense of ableist. It's like ableist and so Lila and so ableist. And she does say it.
So Enid shows up with George.
And I think she asked Liz if they could double with Liz and Todd because she was feeling a little bit uncomfortable. And so they've done that. And do you want to know what Lila says?
I do.
How inappropriate. Who'd ever dream of showing up at a dance in a wheelchair? What does she think she's going to do all night? What a fucking bitch. What she's saying is again, it's like with Robin Wilson, the existence of a person who is using a wheelchair it's in itself an offense to society. Like her existence and presence in the public domain is itself like a violation. It's crazy.
It's truly it's like unbelievably vicious, vile, terrible.
But it's also funny because it's like the way she phrases it as that it's as if, because listen, she goes, who would dream of showing up at a dance in a wheelchair? And so what she's doing is wheelchairs taking the place of X, not the right thing to wear or not the right thing to do. Because the way that sentence is structured, it's like, who would dream of showing up to a dance in denim cutoffs?
Right after Labor Day.
But it's almost implying that like she had an option to show up not with the wheelchair. You know what I mean? It's like, which is obviously crazy. So it's like so wild. Yeah.
We then get Enid and Elizabeth talking back and forth. Enid says, I must look like a real idiot. Who ever heard of a cripple coming to a dance? And then Elizabeth snaps, Enid Rollins, you are not a cripple and you don't look one bit foolish. You have as much right to be here as anyone else does. And this reminds me, and unfortunately we're so late into the episode that we definitely don't have time to give this as much time as I would like to, but it reminds me of one of my very, very, very favorite essays by Nancy Mayer's I Am a Cripple. And I used to read it when I taught high school English. I used to read it with my students just because it's like so evocative and so great. And it opens with, I am a cripple. I choose this word to name me. I choose from among several possibilities, the most common of which are handicapped and disabled. I made the choice a number of years ago without thinking, unaware of my motives for doing so. Even now, I'm not sure what those motives are, but I recognize that they're complex and not entirely flattering. People, crippled or not, wince at the word cripple as they do not at handicapped or disabled. Perhaps I want them to wince. I want them to see me as a tough customer, one to whom the fates, God, virtues have not been kind, but who can face the brutal truth of her existence squarely. As a cripple, I swagger.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. So basically, Enid sees George talking to Robin. She tells George to go ask another girl to dance. He dances with Robin. Then he comes back and Enid like confronts him and her saying like, oh, do you like Robin or something? But it's like he doesn't actually answer. And she then goes back to Liz and is like, oh, it was a misunderstanding. Like, he doesn't like Robin. Like, everything's fine. Todd gives Liz an idea that reminds her of the anniversary of Ned and Alice, which is to give them tickets to this special thing called Bayside, which I don't know what it is.
It's a dinner theater. Immediately before that, we have a moment where Elizabeth and Todd are speaking to each other. They're talking about Enid and George and like infidelity and all of this stuff. But she couldn't picture Todd falling in love with someone else. It seemed impossible. But then Enid must have felt the same way once. As always, Todd seemed to be reading her mind. Come dance with me, he urged her, taking her in his arms. Liz, I don't know what I'd do without you, he whispered in her ear when they were going out on the dance floor. Don't you go getting any silly ideas in your head about some other guy.
You're silly.
I'm not silly at all. Oh my God. Todd is literally saying, don't worry, Liz, I'm not going to leave you for another guy. This is like one of the thousands of examples where Todd does this thing where the only way you can read it is him saying, I'm gay.
And this is a case of what we call syntactic or structural ambiguity.
I don't know that there's so much ambiguity here. We just saw George cheating on, or whatever, on Enid dancing with Robin. Elizabeth gets nervous. Todd can read the nervousness and says, don't go getting any silly ideas in your head about some other guy.
You're right.
Don't you ever worry. I'm not going to leave you for another guy. So
are we at the cold seafood salad yet? Please, are we at the cold seafood pasta salad?
No, first we very, very, very quickly have Enid and Elizabeth talking, and Enid is just like in such firm denial. Robin doesn't mean a thing to George. It was just a big misunderstanding. And Elizabeth goes, well, I thought, and Enid goes, well, you were wrong. I told him to dance with someone. Robin wasn't dancing with anyone. That's what happened.
And then Enid fully says that George wouldn't leave her while she can't walk. And Liz is like, but would you want him to stay with you out of obligation? And Enid's like, I don't know. And then Liz kind of like,
So now
Okay.
we cut to Jessica making dinner for the family, a cold seafood salad.
Just to be super clear about the jibble jimble component of this plot, what would make sense, because this is the thing that's getting all the prep and the thing happening, is if this is the meal, this is the big anniversary meal. No, this is a practice run for what she's planning to then do. So she's doing a practice run that she's telling them is just a dinner. So they don't know that it's a practice run for this thing she's planning to surprise them with, which is on the actual day of the thing, which is the Friday or whatever, Saturday of the anniversary, to like do the dinner, which is going to be some other meal, right? But so like it doesn't make sense, and they just do it, I think, to heighten the thing of like, well, it had to be that day, but it's like whatever, jimble jimble. So this is a practice run, but it's basically the one with the stakes.
But it also doesn't make sense because it's a practice run, but it's not what she's ever been talking about cooking. It's not what she learned in her cooking class. She just picked a random other thing to cook. It makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah, and it's not what she's planning on cooking for the actual thing. She's
Yeah.
gonna make the veal piccata. So I don't know if she was thinking, okay, and she decides on the most fucking random 80s thing I've ever heard in my life, called cold seafood and pasta salad.
Mussels, clams, crab meat, lobster.
It's supposed to be real highbrow event, crab meat. Like it's something that I think Jean-Pierre told her about. He said it's divine.
Yeah. While they're cooking, Elizabeth and Jessica are talking about Enid, and Jessica says that thing that you referenced earlier. Look at it from Enid's point of view. She doesn't have much to gain from walking, does she?
From what you just told me, it sounds like Enid thinks that the minute she walks, George will start running right in the direction of Robin Wilson. But Enid wouldn't deliberately pretend she couldn't walk, Elizabeth burst out. Maybe not, Jessica admitted. It was just an idea. And again, according to Cleveland Clinic, it's a neurological, not a psychological thing here. But according to, I think, the world of this book, Jessica is pretty casually dropping some real wisdom.
I agree.
And maybe also saying what Elizabeth is having a bit of a hunch. You know, things have been starting to take shape.
2 hours later, they've eaten dinner. Everyone but Jessica, she was too busy to actually eat. Everyone did seem to really enjoy it. And then Elizabeth runs out of the room.
Sorry. Before Elizabeth runs out, Jessica hears the freaking words that she has dreamt of. Delicious, Mr. Wakefield said, giving her a big smile. I'm really proud of you. Go ahead.
And then Elizabeth runs out. Her face is changing colors. Oh dear, Miss Wakefield said, holding her stomach. And then Mrs. Wakefield runs out. Jessica, what did you put in that salad? Clams and crab meat and a bit of lobster and mussels. I worked so hard to get the mussels open after I cooked them. The mussels didn't open when you steamed them? Jess, if the shells don't open, you're not supposed to eat them. You can get food poisoning. And then we just get a real bridesmaid scene.
Oh, I was thinking of Sex and the City when Charlotte and Harry kind of have diarrhea and barfing like together after a nice fancy little meal. Anyway, and then she's like, well, at least on Friday, I'm going to be able to redeem myself when I do the actual dinner.
Yeah, like what? If tonight didn't kill her mom and dad off.
Liz makes a joke to Todd on the phone that Jess has a future in the Department of Defense with her cooking. And she concocts a plan that she's not ready to tell Todd, of course, because they love to keep each other in suspense about things. Mrs. Rollins comes over. Can we get into that?
Please.
Mrs. Like, you know, the very famous storyline of stressed out mom confides in Elizabeth and asks Elizabeth to help their daughter. Mrs. Rollins comes over and tells Liz, like, you know, the doctor says she should be able to walk, and physically the doctor thinks that there's a psychological block going on. The mind has mysterious powers in situations like this. It isn't that Enid knows she can walk and won't. She really believes she can't move, but we need to figure out why. Do you have any idea what might be troubling her? And Liz is, of course, thinking about this issues with George, but she doesn't want to say anything. And she's like, well, what am I going to do? I guess I got to talk to Collins.
Elizabeth must go over to Collins's house unannounced, right?
Absolutely. She can't, I don't know, talk to him within school hours, within kind of school borders, within school walls. No.
It's truly wild.
She certainly can't call and ask if it's an appropriate time to visit.
So she rushes in.
Dalton is there, which makes Elizabeth blush. Collins thinks quick and says they are brainstorming ideas for a fundraiser. And while he says this, he takes out a pipe and lights it.
That is true. He is smoking a pipe.
That was extremely startling for me. Smoking a pipe? What is that? Like, what's that? What is that sort of vibe? What am I supposed to take from that?
I think it's just like relaxed around the home kind of vibe.
Okay. And she's like, what should I do about Enid? And they're like, what do you mean? She explains the whole story. And then they're like, well, you have a pretty keen understanding of human nature. I guess you can borrow my child, Teddy. And she's like, great, but I'm not going to tell you why, but I'm going to use him to help me with my plan.
Could you imagine? I mean, they have no boundaries. They have no normal behavior or whatever. But this idea, it's like, oh, yeah, sure, you can borrow my 6-year-old kid for some plan you won't tell me about. And I don't even know why you won't tell me. Like,
yeah, at this point, it tracks, though. Like,
yeah, well.
Like, of course, it's like, yep, gonna ask no questions. Because it's, by the way, insane. The plan, okay? It's insane. Then we get the menu that Jessica's planning for Friday, which is, of course, her chance at redemption. And she's just had this series of setbacks with Jean-Pierre and with the mussels and the clams, and this is going to be it. This is going to be it. And the menu is veal piccata, string beans, wild rice, and raspberry tart.
Sounds delicious to me.
Mrs. Wakefield makes a joke about how, maybe I don't know about that. I don't know if I want to eat your food yet. And then Jessica's annoyed and she's like, I'm only teasing you. You shouldn't be so sensitive. And Jessica thinks, I'm never allowed to be the sensitive one.
It's so hard because objectively, her mom is being awful and objectively, she is right. And I just feel so bad.
I know, my heart broke for her. She thinks it's different for Liz. Everyone expects her to be sensitive. She's the one who cares about what people say and is incredibly thoughtful all the time. So it's like, just because Jessica is like not sensitive to others doesn't mean she wants to be hurt. Is basically what she's saying.
That is true.
And then she literally, again, builds up the sort of stakes for this next thing, which is like, well, Elizabeth hasn't said a word about the anniversary, so I guess she still has forgotten. So I guess I'm still set up for success with my last chance at redemption, and I'm going to have fouled up for the last time.
And
but
then
guess what happens?
Wednesday night, we're all out for Mexican in downtown Sweet Valley. I don't think I knew that Sweet Valley had a downtown, so to speak.
Okay, so how I picture it, and I don't have a map, but how I picture it is that downtown is where, like, places like the Sweet Valley Medical Center and, like, for example, Ned Wakefield's office. Okay. I feel like those buildings is where downtown is. Like
a central business district kind of situation.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Makes sense. I was like, is Kelly's downtown?
No.
Dairy Burger, like, not downtown?
I feel like maybe it's more like outskirts kind of thing. I don't know though. We need a map. There's probably one on eBay. I'm gonna look.
Of course, Ned can't let a moment go by without picking on his daughter. A few nights ago, I thought I'd never want to eat again, and now I'm actually looking forward to enchiladas. Like, great, Ned. I hope you choke on them.
Me too.
And then, ha, 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 Jessica said bitterly. She was sick and tired of being teased about the food poisoning incident. Couldn't anyone in the family find anything else to talk about? What's wrong, Liz? You look kind of down in the dumps, Mrs. Wakefield said after the waiter had taken their order.
It's a disease. They have a sickness. They have a disease. It's like another reading is Jessica just doesn't exist. She's literally invisible. She's a ghost. No one sees, like, literally just no one sees her. And that's what explains it.
I mean, spoiler alert. So please fast forward if you haven't, but like, it's the Sixth Sense. They're in a restaurant and no one is acknowledging Jessica.
Literally.
Did she even get to order?
Literally. And then they just talk about Enid. Ugh.
And then Jessica says it's George Warren's fault. And I don't blame her either. He'd been seeing Robin behind Enid back since the accident, so why wouldn't he run off as soon as he could manage not to look like a total bum? Jessica, we're in a restaurant. Can't you keep your voice down?
And Miss Wakefield hissed at her.
And then Mr. Wakefield's like, how do you know George is still seeing Robin? How does everyone know it? And she says, Daddy, I'm not testifying in court. You don't have to look so serious. But it is a serious matter, Jess. Suppose someone overheard what you said about George. If it isn't true, he might accuse you of slander.
This is where we need to stop and say, we need a name for a moment in the podcast where we can say, And now it's too much. And it's going to be all the time, but it's just with Ned and his comments. I mean, where to begin? First of all, that is not slander.
You dumb fuck.
You fucking idiot who doesn't even know your own goddamn fucking job. Go die. And then Elizabeth's like, I'm afraid she's right, Dad. Like validating Jessica's supposed evidence. So Elizabeth is doing the same interpretation of the evidence of the GTO in the driveway that Jessica's doing. But Elizabeth gets to validate, like she's the authority. She's making the exact same leap.
And then Elizabeth says thoughtfully, a few weeks ago I would have agreed with you, Jess, but the more I've seen of the situation, the more I sympathize with George. I don't think Enid means to be manipulative, but that's just what she's being. George tried to level with her and she refused to listen. To be honest, I feel kind of sorry for him. That a girl, Mr. Wakefield laughed. I knew I could count on you to be objective, Liz. The fuck?
I'm going to write a horror movie based on this, and I'm going to cut that because I'm actually going to do it.
I think this is a horror movie.
It's psychological horror. This is gaslighting. I'm going to write a horror movie about Jessica being gaslit by the Wakefields. I seriously am.
I'm not going to be able to watch it because it's going to be too hard for me. I'll watch it to support you, but it's going to be hard for me. Elizabeth mentions the anniversary and mentions that she got them 2 tickets to Bayside.
And the mom's like, I thought you two had forgotten. It's like, I'm sorry, but like the Wakefields treat their children as if their children need to be so like worshipful of them all the time. Like it reminds me of when they were gonna maybe move to San Francisco and they kept getting on the twins' asses about how they weren't like
happy for their mom,
enthusiastic enough and congratulatory of their mom for having a job opportunity. And like now they're like setting these expectations that the twins have to be going out and like spending money and planning shit for their anniversaries. Like they're 2 16-year-old girls. Like, why are they like, who cares? Like so stupid. Ugh.
And it's just so frustrating because Elizabeth could have said to Jessica, hey, let's do this thing for our parents.
As she could have done every other fucking year. Elizabeth has sat by. She knows Jessica forgets. She knows Jessica forgets. And she knows that she remembers. And every year she does something that she gives to the parents specifically from her. She has zero generosity of spirit. And then Jessica's like, well, wait a minute. I was going to make you this dinner on Friday. And the parents look at each other amused and go, well, it's probably just as well. That's sweet, but I don't think I'll even be fully recovered by then from the other thing.
It's like, so mean.
I hate them. I hate them so much. It really is a horror movie. They completely distort reality. They completely distort everything that both of the girls do. She can't explain herself. She can't be understood. It's like crazy. Okay. Then Liz goes and apologizes to Robin about being a bitch at Casey's. And she bases this on, I thought you and George were still seeing each other even after the crash. So this supposed like misunderstanding is what explains Elizabeth's cruelty.
And we're supposed to believe that if it were true, Elizabeth's cruelty would be okay, which I'm not sure I even buy.
I don't buy it either. But it's Elizabeth's very black and white moral thinking. It's like, so anyway.
Yeah.
And then Robin is like, it's okay.
And then Elizabeth says, thanks. I don't know about you, but I can guarantee I'll sleep better tonight now that we've made up. And it's like, you fake liar. We've had nothing about you losing sleep over how cruel you were to Robin. So please don't pretend like all of a sudden you're going to sleep well when you wouldn't have before. How dare you? You fake liar.
And it's also like, Robin is so fucked right now. It's like Robin is so, she's like talking vaguely. She's distracted. Like she's obviously struggling. And like she explains that this misunderstanding. And it's like clearly everyone has been kind of turning on her. And she's been feeling so guilty. And she also is having the loss of George feeling. And then it's like, well, I hope you forgive me. She's like, I do. And Liz is like, yeah, like you said, like, well, I'll sleep well tonight. Yeah, like Elizabeth just likes to have her conscience clear. And if she does that on this very superficial level, that's enough for her.
I hate. Then we get Enid gets invited to Elizabeth's house. Elizabeth calls Mr. Collins to secure Teddy.
And we have the plot, the pool plot.
Teddy comes over. Teddy is 6 years old.
Insanity.
It is made clear to us as readers that Teddy knows exactly what's going on.
Yeah,
And-
Elizabeth Foley's like, so we all said, and he's like, yeah, and they do the secret signal, like he knows.
And the plan is Enid comes over. Liz says, hey, I'm going to go get us some sodas. Can you watch Teddy for a second? Keep a good eye on him. He can't swim.
And Enid's like, but Liz, and Liz doesn't let her finish her sentence, which obviously the end of it is, I can't move my legs.
Teddy does an elaborate show of playing with a toy and then falling in and pretending to drown. And lo and behold, Enid first screams for Liz and then realizes that Liz can't hear her, and without even thinking, jumps out, gets in the pool, saves Teddy. A broken palindrome, of course, with her earlier saving of George.
And then Liz comes out and she's like, what? And how did you, and the wheelchair. And Enid's like, I don't know, when I saw Teddy drowning, I was out of the chair like a bolt of lightning. I didn't stop to think, I just ran.
Jessica comes out and she goes, what is going on here? Oh, Jess, Enid's cured. She saved Teddy's life. She jumped out of the wheelchair and walked. And then Enid tells the story and says, Liz had just finished telling me Teddy couldn't swim, and there he was, 5 feet over his head. The last thing I was remember and Jessica goes, wait a minute. Liz told you Teddy doesn't know how to swim? What's going on here? Teddy swims like a fish. For a 6-year-old, he's amazing. And then Enid figures out that they lied to her.
Which is so crazy.
Elizabeth says, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to trick you, but I couldn't think of any other way, which is truly insane. Of course she meant to trick her. There's no other thing she meant to do.
I didn't mean to trick you.
Well, like, you can't, words have meaning, Elizabeth. You can't just say, I didn't mean to trick you.
Mm-hmm.
And then Enid says, of course I'm not mad. This is the happiest day of my life. So I just am so irate that Elizabeth's scheme is truly evil. It requires asking a 6-year-old to keep a secret, to lie, and to fake drowning in front of a paralyzed girl in a wheelchair.
Causing her visible distress. Also leading to his own possible drowning.
Yeah.
Putting him in physical danger. And then he mirrors Elizabeth's language when he says, Enid, are you mad? I didn't mean to fake drowning, but I wanted to help Liz. It's like, you did mean to fake drowning.
And then there's no retribution, there's no consequence. The only thing is everybody's happy with Elizabeth. It's like so unbelievable and awful.
And again, not substantiated by the medical literature.
No.
But yeah, basically Enid basically said, like, okay, it was psychological. The mind is a strange thing. I really thought I couldn't move. And that this sort of unlocked for her, I guess, that. Anyhow, then basically suddenly Enid decides to be like understanding of how to be cool about stuff. She's like, well, actually, everything's kind of good, and I'm going to let George go be with Robin. I've been kind of holding on to him, and it's not really fair. They were at the Dairy Burger. Everyone has given Elizabeth a standing ovation at the Dairy Burger for her absolute reckless stunt.
I just can't. I'm sorry, I can't. I can't keep being the same thing.
She's being referred to as a hero.
So brave. I hate this.
The fucking theatrics, too. Like, she couldn't, as a first step, I don't know, maybe look into some therapy options for her friend, or ask the doctor what maybe some treatment could be, or, you know, go offer to attend a physical therapy appointment with Enid and give her some moral support. Some maybe other little smaller steps that she could have tried before throwing her in a fucking pool to see if she drowns, literally.
And then they go home, Elizabeth and Todd, because they're going to have like a sexy night swim. But
conveniently, they don't have to.
What?
Conveniently, they don't have to.
Yeah, Todd's like, ooh, dodged a bullet there. Bayside was marvelous. They had the most wonderful time. And of course, who was there but Roger Collins and the French teacher, Miss Dalton. Mr. Collins told us all about what you and Teddy did this afternoon. Oh, honey, I'm so proud of you. What a wonderful idea. What? It's true. I just can't. I'm sorry. It makes me so angry.
I wonder what drugs Ned and Alice are on, because I think they are checked out in this way where it's like they're just like doo dee doo dee doo. They just sort of float along, you know.
I'm jealous.
I wonder what facilitates that for them chemically. But and then Elizabeth's like, I have the luckiest parents in the world, and I have great Todd, and everything's good. Time for
The worst.
cliffhanger is what Elizabeth thinks to herself. And then, of course, to tie a nice bow and everything, they get the results from the FAA investigation. And it turns out it wasn't George's fault at all. The rental plane had something faulty with the engine. It would have stalled out no matter what George did. And it's like, so if that wouldn't have been the case and it would have been quote unquote George's fault, like what would be the implication of that? Would he be more to be should they be more angry at him? You know what I mean? Like it's just kind of like, Then fucking demon Mr. Wakefield has another little comment. We need a segment called Mr. Wakefield and his little demon comments.
I want to light him on fire and I want to watch his flesh burn. Or whatever.
He's like, I guess you don't want to help me with, because previously Jess had made the whole thing of, I like haute cuisine now, and I'm fancy. And now the family's all still teasing her and being assholes. So he's like, I don't suppose you can help me with the barbecue tonight. Is that still too gauche for you?
And then finally, Mrs. Wakefield says, what's wrong, Jess? You look positively miserable. Why should I be miserable? Just because everything I do these days seems to end up a complete disaster? I can't do anything right.
And then this is where we ring the bell. I don't know if we decided on a phrase of, and now we've like, this is like, what is the word for how the extreme of this?
I'm seeing red. I've redlined. I can't.
I'm seeing red. I'm seeing red too. Go ahead.
Somebody around here is working herself into a real snit, it seems to me. Ned, Mrs. Wakefield said it warningly. Liz, tell us what Enid decided to do about George. It's like, so you can't even acknowledge your daughter's feelings? You immediately have to change the subject to Liz and George?
Ned is actively hostile towards Jessica.
Mm-hmm.
They have been continually teasing her, continually dismissive of her very clear hurt that has been developing and compounding over the past few weeks and months or whatever. And they continue to poke at her. And when she specifically says, like, yeah, I am miserable. Everything I've been doing seems to be like a disaster. I'm feeling actually really down and frustrated, basically is what she tells them.
Mm-hmm.
For his response to be, wow, you're really working yourself into a snit?
Asshole.
What the fuck is wrong with him?
He's the worst.
Ew, I hope very bad things for Ned.
You know what? I have a bigger heart than you, so I just hope that he gets what he needs and that he heals so that he no longer has to be hurtful towards Jessica. But that's just because I kind of have a bigger heart.
Are you still remembering what happens a few lines from now? When after he calls her a snit, and she's like, well, George's car was in the driveway. And then Mr. Wakefield goes, you see, Jess, how dangerous it can be to make judgments based on circumstantial evidence. No, had this been a real slander case.
She leaps to her feet, her eyes blazing. All you guys do lately is pick on me. If Liz had said that George was seeing Robin, you'd think she was being sensible and fair. But just because it's me, you think I'm being a flake. Well, I'm sick of always being wrong. I'm Jessica. I didn't mean to upset you. I am upset. And I don't want hamburgers for dinner either. If you guys will excuse me, I'm going up to my room. Liz, let her go. She'll cool down in a few minutes, Mrs. Wakefield said. I will not. Jessica thought furiously, racing upstairs and slamming the door to her room as hard as she could. She'd had just about enough of her family treating her badly. And since her plan to impress them had been such a miserable failure, she was going to have to come up with some other way of changing their minds about her. Only I'd better think of something fast, she told herself, tears trickling down her cheeks as she threw herself onto her bed, because I don't think I can stand things the way they are around here any longer. Jessica embarks on a desperate course of action in Sweet Valley High number 21. Runaway.
This fills me with so much rage and sadness.
Mm-hmm.
So much. It's like they all treat her like she doesn't have feelings or her feelings don't matter. It's so frustrating.
It's also interesting the way that she says, like, she needs to change their minds about her.
Mm-hmm.
It's so truly heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's like she's not she tried to get their love from getting like approval vis-a-vis cold seafood salad,
Of course.
and that didn't work. So is there another way to make them notice her?
I mean, I expect this is going to be like a movie of the week situation where she runs away. Oh God, what I hope happens is she runs away. They realize how much they love her and miss her, and she is safely returned and everything is fine. What I worry is something more insidious where she runs away and some guy either tries to assault her or does assault her, and she's like scared and alone, and she has to call her parents, and her parents are like the bigger people who overcome their anger and like accept her back.
Okay, well, I can't say anything, but
Nor should you. Okay.
Thanks for listening to Sweet Valley Hive, hosted by Robert Marks and Rebecca Pardo. For more, check out our Instagram at Sweet Valley Hive. Theme song by Yessie and artwork by Elliot Carroll.